Perfect. Well, welcome everybody to our March virtual tasting. And we are very happy tonight to have John Merrick from MEA Wines here with us. And technically his wife Daniela is here as well, but she's being a little camera shy, but hopefully she will chime in at some point. She's here to participate. Of course, we're recording this, so for everybody who wasn't able to make it live tonight, you'll be able to watch this starting tomorrow morning. I'll be sending out the link. As always, I'll mute everybody right before we start. And then if you've got any questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat, and I'm happy to ask them to John, just so we can keep the flow going. And keep an eye out next week. I think it's next week. We're going to send out the email for our next wine shipment, but we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of tonight's festivities. But without further ado, where is the mute all button? There we go. All right. So John and Allison, you'll need to unmute yourselves when I hit this button, but that's okay. We're just do that. Perfect. So without further ado, let me introduce tonight's very special guest, the owner and winemaker of MEA Wines, John Merrick, who is here with us tonight, live from just south of where are you? Your home, or are you at the office tonight? It looks like the office.
Yeah,
you're at the winery down in Atascadero, one of the few and the proud Atascadero wineries down there.
Yes. Yes, in fact, we are the only ones that are making the wine here in Atascadero. So
nice.
Have our facility in Atascadero.
I think that needs to be a huge marketing push for you guys. Atascadero's only production winery. Boom, make it happen. Awesome. So we always start every tasting by asking you, John, what is the best bottle of wine that you have ever had?
I thought that was a funny question when I read it, and for me, it's probably a wine that was most remarkable. I don't know. I mean, I always have, and I think many people do have a hard time finding what was the best wine they ever had. But a remarkable wine, and one that probably set me into motion to being interested to be in the wine business, was, I think it was in the year 2000. I was in Spain, and it was just coming upon and buying a bottle of a Ribera del Duero Tempranillo in a restaurant at a reasonable cost, which is unheard of now.
Yeah.
And just being sort of entranced by how deep and rich that wine was. And it was probably 5 or 6 years old, so it was probably in the range of a 93 or 94 at the time.
Right.
And it was fantastic. And I grow Tempranillo now, so it definitely had an impact, I guess.
I mean, were you, before you had that bottle, was getting into the wine business, planting a vineyard, growing any wine at all, let alone Tempranillo, was that something that you had been thinking about, or was it that bottle that kind of really started the ball rolling?
No, that was long before. It was really just long before I was even in the wine business, or even, I guess, dreaming about it. It was much earlier.
Okay, interesting.
But,
so,
having an interest in wine, and that was probably, 10 years into an interest in wine. I think that, you remember those times or those instances where, they're definitely etched into my head, and they're there while I'm, making wine now here 20 years later.
Absolutely. Where in Spain were you? Do you remember which city? Town?
I think I had the wine while I was up in Barcelona or San Sebastian.
Very nice.
So it was kind of like I was on my way to Rioja, but I had come up from Madrid and kind of driven through Ribera del Duero, without really knowing much about it, and settling into a nice restaurant on the North Coast.
Nice. Those are two of my favorite cities, not just in Spain, but in the world, I will say, are Barcelona and San Sebastian.
John, did you have is it called lechuza? The beautiful meat, what is it? The baby lamb that they serve in Ribera del Duero?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't recall.
Oh, it's actually a PDO or a DOP. it has a little tag on it when it goes into the oven. It says it verifies it. And I gotta say, with a glass of Tempranillo from Ribera del Duero,
Jeannie and Mike, I'd just like to apologize for Allison and her talk
Sorry.
of baby lambs. We
Thank you.
apologize for that. Yeah, you're welcome. Our
Well,
resident vegans here.
Or two in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if it wasn't that bottle, was there a moment or, a bottle or something that like triggered it for you that made you think, boom, I want to get into the wine industry? Or was this something that you just were kind of always wanting to do?
what was that aha moment?
Yes.
Yeah, for the wine, for getting into the wine industry, not really. I mean, I purchased a ranch in Paso Robles in 2005, and I went out wine tasting around the area a lot, and really got interested in a lot of wines. But I don't think that there was one particular and so then therefore it would have to be local wineries around the Paso Robles area. And I don't really think that there was one in particular that I really honed in on. There were already many great wineries in the area, and more to be discovered. And so it was really my own doing. I started this by planting a vineyard and making home wine.
Mhm.
That's my start.
Yeah. Well, let me take a step back. So what brought you to Paso Robles in the first place? Where were you before? What were you doing? How did you discover Paso and decide not only, this is where I want to move and live, but I'm going to buy a ranch on the west side as well?
Right. Well, I was living and working in Southern California in Orange County, and myself and my ex-wife owned a architecture firm. And we were looking for a property somewhere north of LA in some sort of wine country or just country area. Mm-hmm. And we had probably interest was first peaked in the Ojai area because we were doing a project in that area. And then it started moving further and further north as we found that there's very little land, and it was very expensive, being close to LA. And
Yes.
the further we went north, we actually ended up finding that we liked the properties more and more the further north we went. So that's what really ended up bringing us out of Santa Barbara County and into San Luis Obispo County.
Okay, interesting. And then what led you to planting a vineyard on the property? Because again, that's not, that's a lot of responsibility and a lot of time and a lot of money. And unless you've got a real passion for it, which clearly you do, it's not something that the average person decides to do on their property.
No, it isn't. Although I've heard the story many times now since. So maybe I was doing it before, well, not before a lot of others, but I mean, it's actually gotten even more popular more recently, and probably more regret by people that have done it.
You were country before country was cool.
Yeah, I guess. So, I think that I had the land. I always, when I got the property in 2005, I was working a lot in Southern California, and so I was only able to get up to the area on weekends and a few other times during the year. Later, I was able to spend more time at the property after I sold off that business, and as a result, I started thinking about what did I want to do with it. And now I don't have a very large vineyard. It's not a big commercial vineyard. Right. It's just a small vineyard that I can manage mostly by myself, with some help from crews when I need them. And it gives me small lots of wine that are consistent with the business that I intended to create.
Okay, nice. And that's kind of a nice seg into our first wine tonight, which is the Costera. 2019 Costera white blend that you've got here, because this is a blend of some of your estate fruit and some fruit that's not estate. This is 40% Chardonnay, 20% Viognier, 20% Albarino, and 20% Vermentino. So take us through that blend, how those grapes came to be, which ones are on your property, which ones aren't.
Yeah. So the Albarino and Vermentino are on my property. And we did in 2019, we produced an Albarino, a straight Albarino and a straight Vermentino as well. And each of those four we had as a single varietal wine. The Albarino and Vermentino, as I said, were from my property. The Chardonnay came from my next door neighbor's property, which just recently was plowed under and it's been restored to a natural landscape.
Oh.
and that will go along with the red wines that we're going to talk about later. And then the Viognier came from a small vineyard that is toward the coast, out off of Santa Rosa Creek Road, off the 46 West. So it gets a lot more of the ocean influence out in that area. Costera was named, we named the Costera just as the coastal blend because it does come from 3 different vineyards in the area, and it kind of encompasses the biggest range of wines, of the white wines that we make.
Got it.
The label, you see the label on it, that was Daniela. She fashioned the label from a photo that we had taken at my ranch looking west at the sunset.
It's beautiful art. Is that kind of a filter or something that you did to it? Because then
it's going through artistic filters until we got something that changed a photo into something that we felt was an artistic expression of the wine and of our ranch, of the ranch.
So John, I'm curious, not to get ahead on your other wines, but when I look at the other labels, they have the same different color, but same label. What sets this one apart? Why do you have a different label on the Costera?
Well, you'll have to see all the rest of my wines that we don't have in the lineup to explain that, because the 3 other wines that you have in front of you are all similar because it was our first round of doing labels. We were developing our brand and we were trying to come up with a label and have variety through the different grape varieties that we were producing. Since then, each wine has sort of broken out of that mold and into its own unique label design. So we just finished 6 other labels that we're going to be bottling in the next few weeks, and they are way off of these. They're much different, and they're all kind of they're unique. So it's really just been the evolution of our labels.
Yeah. Are you going more towards the artwork side of things with those, or do you have artists who are doing the labels for you? Or
no, it's all myself and Daniela. It's us choosing what each label is going to be. Some of them, if you look at the Viognier, Merlot in perspective, the sun in the background of that is taken from a stone painting or rock painting. Mm-hmm. And I've kind of collected a lot of those, and I use them in various ways on labels, just to evoke the sunshine of the Paso Robles area. And so we do have something similar on a couple of the upcoming labels. And then we have other ones that are taken from photos and turned into artwork. So it just depends on the wine. Whatever whim we have for that wine, we run with it.
Got it. So take us through the Costera, or let's talk a little bit more about your property, because you are on the west side. And actually, Matt just asked a question just to go over the blend again. 40% Chardonnay from the west side, and your property and your neighbor's property are both in the Adelaida district.
That's correct.
Of the west side of Paso. And then the 20% each Viognier, Vermentino, and Albarino. And yeah, I kind of want to talk about, your property, where it's located, because it is on the west side, it's cooler, and then why you chose Vermentino and Albarino. I mean, in addition to the other 2 varietals, Syrah and Tempranillo, it's almost kind of one of these things is not like the other situation for the west side of Paso. You find a lot of Syrah out there, but not a lot of the other 3 varietals. So what drew you to those grapes? How did you decide to to plant those on your property?
Yes, well, I decided to plant those on, I actually started with 6 different varieties on the property. And I reduced it to 4 just to get larger yields from each one of those grapes. I also had Mourvèdre and I had Picot Blanc on the property originally.
Nice.
And I just had to choose 2 to drop in order to consolidate a bit. But I chose them because the way I approached the winemaking and the vineyard was based on wines that I thought were unique and interesting that I had come across in travels or in restaurants, you know, basically varieties that I really like and that I felt that would be interesting to work with. As far as like deciding to plant them on this property, I wanted, you know, it's similar to an estate winery property like Halter Ranch, which is just over the hill from me, or Tablas Creek, which is next door to me as well. They have large vineyards and they have planted many different varieties there. And because of our west side location, and you know, we have the proximity to the ocean, and we also have a little tiny tag of the Templeton Gap that comes up through our area. And as a result, it kind of gives us the ability to grow pretty much anything on the property. Now, there might be cooler places to grow Albarino, but we get plenty of cooling in the afternoons and evenings on my property as well. So, you know, and then there's one other aspect to my vineyard, which is that it's planted on a northeast facing slope. Okay. And that kind of gives us a little bit of afternoon shade from the highest heat portions of the afternoons in the summertime.
Yeah, so you're definitely in a cooler spot with that northeast facing because you're getting a lot of shadow from the afternoon sun.
Yes, and that's combined with the hill that it's on is one of those that the wind comes up over it and then back down the vineyard hill. So it's amazing in the afternoons how even if it's been a very warm day, sometimes I'm throwing on a jacket as I'm finishing up work in the vineyard. It seems absurd some days, but it happens.
Oh yeah, it's that classic diurnal temperature change that Paso has, where especially on the west side, it can go from 100 degrees at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock to 55, 60, sometimes even 50 degrees by the time the sun goes down, and it gets chilly down there.
Well, in ours, it's kind of that cool wind, but then once the wind dies down, it actually warms back up a bit. So it's actually leaves us pretty comfortable in the evenings after the wind.
Nice.
Yeah.
So take us through the creation of this wine. Obviously 4 different white grapes, probably ripening and coming in at different times. Are you processing the fruit the same? Are you fermenting it the same? Or are you doing different things to each of these?
We're doing different things generally. For the Albarino and Vermentino, they are pretty straightforward wines. They're clean, they're no malolactic, they're stainless steel fermented, because basically we want those 2 varieties to produce that sort of bare wine kind of a process. And that is one of the things that we ferment them cool, quite cool, and they ferment very slowly, but it helps us retain a lot of the mouthfeel and a lot of the aromatics and a lot of the fruit flavors, the stone fruits and the tropical fruit flavors.
Okay, interesting.
Whereas, and then moving on to the Viognier and the Chardonnay, those are both probably they're produced similarly to one another, but not to the other 2. So they'll go into some aging in mostly neutral oak barrels, and they'll age out in those for a while before they get blended back into the blends and at the time of bottling.
Are you doing any leaf stirring or anything for texture, or is that just the way the combination of the grapes play out in their different combination?
I don't do a lot of lees stirring. I kind of get the wines a little bit cleaner in the process, and there isn't a lot of lees there. And for me, it's been working well. So what I really find is that they end up with quite a nice mouthfeel anyway. And so I'm going to stick with it, I guess. That's my camp over here.
Okay, it's got a nice mouthfeel, so it's got a little kind of creamy texture. So,
and they're also very bright and clear and shiny, and and those are all through very natural processes. And I'm always sometimes I'm quite surprised by how much they shimmer in the light when I'm expecting to have to do something to make that happen.
Yeah. When you think of 40% of this wine being Vermentino and Albarino, I think you're expecting more of that kind of sharp, tart, more acidic blast to it. But it is very round. That was the first thing I noticed, was just how creamy the wine was in the mouth, straight up. And do you attribute that more to the Chardonnay or the Viognier or that neutral oak aging, or is it just kind of the way the grapes come out?
Well, I think it's a combination of the neutral oak aging and probably the Viognier having a bit more of that feel to it. It's got the oily kind of background to it, and that gives it a little bit more mouthfeel. But honestly, I mean, I find it in the Albarino as well, very, very much so.
Nice.
Vermentino, not so much. Vermentino is a little bit thinner.
Yeah, that can be
and
real.
Of course, per usual, Matt's paired it quite well.
Yep, zucchini vichyssoise with that, which sounds delicious. And you'll have to share the recipe with Jeannie and Mike, because that sounds delightfully vegan as well, I imagine.
But it actually, that sounds like something that would work well with this wine. So
yeah,
you guys must have planned ahead.
it's like they got the wines a week ago and knew what they were doing. Exactly. Was it was it always your intention, John, to lead this blend with the Chardonnay, or was that simply based around just the tonnage that you got and what was available?
Yeah, it was more what was available. This blend was kept after our initial bottling, and so we had it probably for another 6 or 8 months. But it wasn't, we had taken it out of the barrels and everything, and so we just had it as individual lots in stainless steel at the time for a while it was aging longer. And then when we put it together, we had these amounts, and it came out really nicely.
Nice. Excellent. And I know you've done some future Costeras that you're in the process of releasing. Are they going to be similar blends to this, or are you going to lean more into what you've got in the estate, now that you've got more leaves under your belt and hopefully those vines are producing a little more tonnage?
I'm not sure. I mean, we actually did, for 2020, we ended up doing a co-ferment of my Albarino and Vermentino. And that one was a logistics thing in that we got a really low crop that year. So it was really just too small to deal with as two different wines. And it actually was an amazing wine. It's amazing wine. So I'm really pleased with that. If I had more to play with and I could do, some of the straight Vermentino and some of the straight Albarino, and then also have some for a blend, I would do it. I think it's a really interesting blend. But for the most part, we're going to be doing, in the white wines, we'll be doing individual variety wines.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Nice. Can I ask, what kind of tonnage are you getting for the Vermentino and the Albarino off your vineyards?
No, they're really small. They're like a ton each.
Oh, wow. Okay. So like basically single barrel kind of program, or?
Yeah, a little bit more. I mean, since these things are in stainless steel, we can pick our vessels to put them in, and based on what we've got. And we had quite a bit in 2019, but very short in 20. We got a little bit more in 21, which is nice. So we're getting at least a reasonable case count for those.
Good. Well, that's excited. And
That's coming. Yeah.
I've had a chance to try the, the single Albarino and the single Vermentino, and they're both delicious and highly, highly recommended. I thought the blend would be a fun entree to your wines. So
yeah, this one's been very popular with people as well. So
yeah, absolutely. And we know that zucchini vichyssoise is a nice pairing with this, but any other pairing recommendations that you've got for this particular wine?
I think, for me, this one is the charcuterie plate wine for me. It's great with appetizers. I'm not sure it's really, I would probably pick, one of the other single varietals for my fish dishes and stuff like that, but and vegetable dishes, but I really like this one just as an appetizer type of wine, or cooking while I'm cooking, not cooking wine while cooking.
While cooking, very important. Yeah, no, I could definitely see some appetizers. Like I'm just thinking anything fried, but like because it's got that kind of creamier mouthfeel, but there's still a nice acidic balance to it. So like fried mozzarella, I think would be fantastic with this. Fried artichoke hearts, even just like a chips and guacamole. I think it's got a little bit of that tropical fruit note to it that you could pair this. Very nice. Allison, any thoughts on pairings?
I'm trying to think through the charcuterie. I can see that. I don't know if I agree fully with you, Chris, on that, because with the fried food, I think I want something that's got a little less texture, a little more acidity. Because I think I'm just trying to think what I would have this with. Maybe
Daniela threw out ceviche, which is a fish appetizer, so it's kind of straddling the line between the two. Very nice.
I don't know. I mean, I can maybe see it with fried chicken.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. How about grilled cheese sandwich?
Yeah, maybe a little bit more, just because, the wine has the body to stand up to that, but has the acidity to kind of cut through. So yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're throwing on like an Emmentaler or a Gruyere, more of a nutty cheese, I think would be really interesting with that. So.
And I was thinking shrimp cocktail as well, but it's similar to ceviche.
Yeah. I'm trying to envision like the piquancy of a good cocktail sauce with that, but it could be really nice. Even just straight up peel and eat shrimp with like a little bit of an Old Bay kind of seasoning on it, because it's got that richness of the mouthfeel. I think it could stand up to a little bit more of a pungent spice, like an Old Bay that's got a little more of that paprika and a little cayenne and whatnot on there. So fantastic. Well, let's move on to the 2019 Viognier. So same year as the Costera. Is this the same Viognier that you got from that Santa Rosa Creek vineyard, or is this from a different vineyard?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story that in 2019, I ended up getting a last minute call that I could get a little bit more Viognier from another vineyard. And it kind of led me to another source of Viognier since then. So, which I used in my 21. We ended up fermenting both of these vineyards together. So there was the one on Santa Rosa Creek Road, and then there's one that's in the Willow Creek district, which is just off of Arbor Road, off of West 46. And so we've got, I think about half and half. I think there's a little bit more of the one out west further. And then this one came in one day later. It just happened to be ready to go.
Oh, good timing.
Yeah, and interesting that the grapes, they were a little bit different, but they were both really high quality. I really liked both of them. I liked what they looked like. I liked how they tasted when we were in the vineyard. And so I was very happy to bring them both into the same tank.
Nice. And were they at similar bricks levels? Because I imagine if the bricks are off by a point or two, that could be difficult with the fermentation to try to get it, all the way down.
It wasn't too bad. The ones that I got the day later were a bit higher. They were a bit higher than I wanted them to be, but it wasn't outside the parameters that were, that I felt were going to still produce a quality wine. And they were within, this was like, I mean, we're talking 0.6 or 7 bricks different.
Okay.
So, I was already kind of at the top on the westerly ones, and then these were a bit higher than I wanted, but still within reason. So made it happen. But
Very
no,
nice.
anything, the way we do the fermentations, when we're cold fermenting, we're pitching a yeast for those, and we have a very clean juice that we're starting with. We have not had any problems with fermentations. Sometimes they take longer than others, but they'll go.
Yeah, I imagine, being down in Atascadero and off of Traffic Way like you are, it's a little bit of a warmer area, obviously, than the west side. So it's probably easier to control the temperatures and, have a little bit more heat to kind of kickstart things out there.
Well, we're 100% temperature controlling all of our fermentations anyway. I mean, the red fermentations are not, they're not chilled or anything, but we have the ability to move them around and make the temperature where we want it to be, just by either moving it into the barrel room or moving it out. So
okay, nice.
It's pretty easy to keep everything in line where we want it.
Yeah. And, how did you end up with your vineyards, on the west side of Paso, off of Adelaida Road, so close to Halter, so kind of really in that northwest corner of Adelaida? How did you come across this facility in Atascadero and decide, this is where we're going to stake our production facility?
Well, many of these questions are answered by logistics and practical reasons.
Sure.
The property that I own in Adelaida is off of a private road. I don't have access to a public road directly. And as a result, building a winery on the property is expensive at the very least, and perhaps impossible at the worst case.
Right. Right.
As a result, I learned early on that was not going to happen, even at the smallest scale that I could imagine. As a result, I started looking for a property in town, started looking in Paso Robles, Templeton, and eventually found a property in Atascadero.
Nice. Just kind of made that spiral outward and outward and outward.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I started out with a realtor and told him, hey, I'm looking for a place to lease or to buy in Paso Robles. And after, months of chasing our tails, I said, look, we need to expand the search here. This is ridiculous. I'm never going to find anything if I stick to those parameters. And so when we opened it up, eventually something, came our way. Nice. And it just happens to be the size I wanted, the size that I was going to try to lease somewhere. And the building was available. And so we went for it immediately.
Very nice. So did this Viognier, it went into the neutral oak to age. Did you bottle this one earlier? Because you had talked about how the four wines that went into the Costera, you held them a little bit longer, put them into stainless steel. So was this one, you kind of knew that you wanted to bottle the single varietal earlier rather than let it have that extra age to it? Yeah,
that was the bottling date. The Costera was let's hold on to them for a while. It was taking a portion of it and holding it till later. So we were already on track for the bottling for the 19 on the time that we did this one. We bottled Viognier and Chardonnay and the Albarino and Vermentino, all of the single varietals we did that day. And the Costera was the ones that we kept small lots available for later bottling. In the future, in later years, in 2020, we did it by keeping 2 barrels of Viognier and holding them in barrel, including one new barrel, one new and one neutral. We bought one mid-year and we created a reserve that way by those 2 barrels. The Costera was a little bit less, about imparting another flavor or aging longer. It was more about, I've got these wines, let's do a blend, and we don't have the time to do it now. So let's hold some of each of the wines and come up with a blend later.
Got it. Kind of kicking the can down the road, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Making the decision. Let's leave that decision until the next bottling date. We already had the next bottling date, so we knew we had, the opportunity to do something down the line.
Got it. So yeah, very, very smooth. Just really easy drinking Viognier, but it has quite a bit of acidic structure. So definitely recognizable as more of that west side Viognier style rather than the east side, where it can get really round, oily, have that, just super rich, more overripe stone fruits without that acidic base to it.
And part of this was designed by only taking a portion of it through malolactic fermentation. So we did. I think it was about 40% of it went through malo, and the other portion of it we held and stopped it. So I think that was sort of, from my point of view, my preference. I want to retain some of the stronger acid in it. And that gave me a controlled way of doing so.
Yeah, I think that's so important with Viogniers, because so many of them, it's such a fickle grape that has that, narrow window to pick it, or else your Brix level, your alcohol level can spike on it if you wait too long, or if you pick it a little underripe, you lose the wonderful aromatics with it. So right. It can be tricky to get it just the right time.
Yeah, you have to get past that. You have to get past that ripeness point, right, where you start getting all of these things to open up. And if you go too far, you can start getting some bitterness and some other flavors that are just not what you're looking for in the wine.
Bad phenolics, bad phenolics.
I mean, I think the key with Viognier constantly is to maintain acidity, because the problem is the ones that fail are the ones that just lack that, and they get flabby and they get,
Right.
Yeah. And then they lose their ageability, and they can, turn and oxidize after 2 or 3 years very quickly and just become just a terrible wine.
Not very yummy.
No, but not this one. I think, this is
one.
Yes. What, obviously this is still fairly young, being a 2019, but is this a wine that you're looking at potential ageability for this? Have you, put a couple of cases back for yourself just to test it out and see how long you can let it go for?
Honestly, I don't have enough experience for that to know that. I have to ask somebody who's been in the business much longer than myself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never have real high hopes that they're going to age for a very long time. But I don't know that. So I just don't have an answer for that right now. I'm hopeful though. What I found is that each year that I've been making these wines, I've really enjoyed them as they age. So
when was your first vintage?
Really, the first thing that I bottled in white wines was 18. So this is only the 19 is only my second year of bottling. I did home winemaking, but honestly, in the earlier years, while my vines were very young, and I was learning to make wine, and making wine in very small batches. White wines are very difficult in small batches. They're oxidizing, as you juice them, you're behind the 8 ball.
The clock is ticking the minute those skins get broken open, basically.
And so if I do have some of my older white wines, I still have a few bottles of them, and they taste oxidized to me already, but I attribute most of that to the fact that I was making, a 10 or 12 gallon batch of wine, and it's just, the oxidation level on that volume of wine is just, it's exponentially high.
Well,
Yeah.
also, I'm sure the quality of your grapes was different than what you're doing now.
Oh, indeed, definitely. I mean, that's like, I know that some of Chris's questions coming up are about things like that, but the thing that I really learned as being a beginning farmer as well is, what it takes to make a fabulous crop of grapes at the end of that season. And I did not know what I was doing when I was starting out. And so there was a lot of there were some difficult harvests. And I was making wine with probably substandard grapes at the time.
Yeah.
And when did you plant your vineyard?
2011.
Okay, so by now it's got a little age on it. It's got some
And so
character to it.
I have experience. That's what's really mostly important.
You have a decade under your belt as a grape
Yes.
grower.
Your vines are now grown-up children, and you know their individual personalities and how they
Now
react.
I'm an old hat at this because I've been doing vineyard for 10 years. That's a mark of experience.
So if I understand the timing correctly, you were home, you were making wine at home with subpar grapes. You planted your vineyard in 2011, but your first vintage was in 2018, was the white wine. So during that time, you were really more focused on grape growing, or were you buying, you weren't buying fruit because you hadn't bottled wine. So you were really focused on the process before you got into the winemaking.
What do you mean?
Well, you focused on growing the grapes and the vineyard and understanding that part of it.
The ultimate grassroots effort is to grow the grapes and make the wine from that. Yes. So I didn't go work for another winery. I didn't go learn my winemaking from college or other winemakers. I learned and taught myself along the way, and I was teaching myself the vineyard practices as well as the winemaking, and
So all YouTube videos, winemaking by YouTube videos.
yeah.
And your total acreage is?
Of grapes under vine on my property is only 1 acre.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a tiny plot. He and I have chatted about this.
But a lovely manageable amount. You can walk it every morning. You probably know it intimately.
It's my domain Romani Conti. It's my little plot.
It's your Chateau Gruyere. Exactly. It's your little monopole.
Something I usually ask winemakers for my podcast that Chris never asks, and I'll throw this in, is, do you talk to your vines? Have you been known to, with 1 acre and the intimacy you have with that acre, how familiar are you with your grapes? What's the communication?
I'm extremely familiar with my grapes, but most of the talking is when I trip over something, and it's not lovely words. It's
Do they love Jackie Wilson?
Yeah. It's also a hillside site, which makes me very tired when I walk the entire vineyard. So it's, even though it's only 1 acre, it's that makes Daniela was funny there.
Yes. Well, that was going to be a question that I was saving, but she, it's throwing it out there. What? No, that's okay. What, how did the MEA name come to be for your wines?
On a search for, I've kind of an interest in Latin because the Romans were so instrumental in the development of the wine industry, or not the industry of their time, I guess.
Yeah.
But
really, it's the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were the ones who really helped.
The what?
The Phoenicians.
Okay. Well, yeah, yes, certainly. But let's just go to.
I'm Team Phoenicia, but that's just.
The Roman Empire definitely had an awful lot to do with the wine production of Europe. So the name came from a search of words and phrases and things that were Latin that I could use to evoke my sense of what my winery would be. And so mine is what I came up with. And it also gave me a bold and short name to use that I could stamp onto the front of every bottle. And I really didn't want it to be a long drawn out name for the winery. I really wanted it to be simple. And what I found is that it's also very confusing.
No. Well, yeah, that's true. And especially doing it in all caps like that, because some people might be, is it MEA? Is it?
What does it stand for?
Right.
Is it MEA? Is it? Yes. And you know, really those are all talking points. So we have a blast with it. It works.
Excellent. Yeah,
we get to correct people, or sometimes we don't, you know. We just let it be whatever they want it to be.
So Allison's putting on her I'm about to get out of here cardigan, so we can we'll finish up with the white, because I know Allison wants to talk a little bit about the Merlot as well. But
I mean,
it's important to note that, you know, Matt is having linguine with cream sauce, Black Forest ham, and peas with this one, and they find both of the whites amazing. Excellent pairings with that. So and yeah, because of that acidity again with this Viognier, I could definitely see like creamy pastas would be fantastic with this, like sandabs with a nice or blanc sauce on top of it would be.
I can see that. Do you get, when I drink this, I get really on the back of my tongue, I really get an interesting sweetness with some tartness from the acid on it that I think is really unique, and I really love it.
Yeah, absolutely. This probably even more than the Costera, I think, would be the thing to pair it with fried or sauteed things, because it does have a little bit more of that kind of serrated acidity to slice through things. So this would be your fried chicken, or even better, like spicy chicken strip wine.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Nashville hots?
No, Nashville hot, you could, yeah, Buffalo might be a little too overpowering, or just like if you go to, you know, we go to Albertsons here and they have nice spicy chicken strips where the spice is cooked into the breading. So.
All right, so I want what I think it'll go with is a sauteed octopus with a smoked paprika, Spanish paprika on it.
I have a question just before I have to jump off. John, you said you have Tempranillo and what else planted?
Syrah.
Syrah. And your vineyard is in technically what AVA?
Adelaida.
Adelaida. Okay. So I'm curious, knowing that I see on the whites, there's San Luis Obispo County.
That's the coast. Yeah, both of these happen to be.
Because of where you're sourcing the fruits.
Correct.
Next time, can you proudly say Slow Coast on your labels? Since yesterday it was announced that it's a new AVA approved by the TTB.
Well, that I know, I realize that, but the Viognier from the Santa Rosa Creek actually falls into that.
Ah.
So this one, so we had at the time, half of it was Willow, or portion of it was Willow Creek, and portion of it was the county only. And now that one is within that Slow Coast one. So yeah, I know it's very.
I wanted to throw in the new AVA comment.
Yeah, good one, good one.
Allison always likes to feel smarter than the rest of us do. So good job, Allison.
No.
Allison.
I am smarter than some people. No, I'm kidding. I'm teasing.
But that's actually interesting. So is it because of that co-ferment with the Viognier, the fact that you blended them together, that sort of kept you from putting just a Paso Robles AVA on these, because it came from that Santa Rosa Creek outside of the AVA?
Well, I don't remember what the rules are, and maybe Allison knows that if you have them from multiple AVAs, I think you have to call out each one of those that way, and it gets awfully wordy on your labels. But
I thought it was normally if you've got one grape that's at least, or if you have at least 75, or no, I'm sorry, it's 85%. I guess that's it. It's 85% of grapes from one particular AVA, you can call it that AVA. But since you've got 20% here that probably comes from outside of that range.
So that Viognier was like 40%, 40% Willow Creek and 40% which is the new Slow Coast.
Yeah.
Which you said was Santa Rosa Creek
Yeah, and that's in the Slow Coast. Yeah.
and Willow Creek.
I
Okay.
looked at the map the other day and I was like, hey, it is in there. Good.
And-
Because it goes in all the way to York Mountain.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
And I think up through Cambria. And so like the
Right.
Derbyshire vineyard that's up, north of Cambria will be in that Slow
Yeah.
Coast.
And that was the intent of that one, which is
Yeah.
cool.
And then the, because I was going to say with the reds, those are not coming, those are Adelaida districts. So that's why I wanted to throw that in before I moved on from the whites.
Which we will do right now by talking about the 2017 Merlot. So again, another varietal that you don't grow on your own vineyard, but how did you come about this Viognier, or excuse me, this Viognier, got my head still in the whites. Sorry. How did you come about this Merlot? Was Merlot a grape that you always wanted to work with, or is this one of those, again, those cases where you got a call and somebody had some available and you kind of went with the flow?
Both the Merlot and the Perspective, which is Cab and Merlot blend, came from my next door neighbor's vineyard, and he had a 20-acre commercial vineyard on his property, was selling grapes, or I think he leased, well, he was selling the grapes the first year he owned the property, and then he leased the property for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
To someone to manage the whole thing. At that time, he had put into the lease agreement that he gets some for himself every year. He had gone through a couple of different winemakers who had been making the wine. I had a few years under my belt as home winemaker, and he asked me if I would make him some wine and I could keep the rest of that for my future winery at the time. So I started being his winemaker for his wine that he was going to keep, and keeping some for myself. So this was for the next door neighbor's vineyard, again, which is no longer there.
Right.
But
and
it
go ahead.
have a pretty interesting pedigree. I mean, that at least the Merlot from that property has had something like 25 years of interest by local winemakers who had been making the wine from that vineyard, year in, year out for a long time. And it hadn't been really in the forefront for a while until my neighbor had started farming it again himself and really putting all of the effort into it. And some of those people started coming back and saying, hey, I want some of that if that's available. I didn't know it was still there. So
Yeah.
about from 17 till 21, 17 to 5 years, it kind of came back to being kind of a pretty interesting and well-liked vineyard.
Yeah,
And
it's
actually, this Merlot got us a double gold medal and best of class at the Central Coast Wine Competition last year.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm a judge at that competition,
Oh.
so you're
Well,
welcome.
she takes Venmo if you need it. So well, okay, so that's interesting. So then obviously this is a vineyard 25 years. It survived the sidewaysification of Merlot and was starting to trend back up. So what led your neighbor to decide to basically just pull up stakes and plow it over and go back to non-vineyard?
Than that, he sold the property, and the new owners are actually the owners of Halter Ranch winery, and they're
it's Hans York.
And Hans York, and as you know, they are big conservation people, and so they bought up many properties around the area,
Right.
and taken out mostly small vineyards, or just put land into conservation categories.
That's interesting because it's kind of good and bad now that I think of it, because it's great that they're conserving the land, but then if you're tearing up, potential West Side vineyards that are competition for your own,
Yeah, and I think if it's a small vineyard that is pre-existing, what's the point? But it's their choice to do it. It's their home residence. So, they bought it for their house and for privacy and everything. And if that's their choice, it's only 20 acres. It's not like it's gonna bust the whole West Side.
Oh, you say that now, but
I know.
If everyone had that attitude, it adds up.
But
Yeah.
almost no one has it. No one else has that attitude. So we're good, I think.
we can directly say that that's causing the housing prices in Paso to rise. Is the billionaires buying up properties, not allowing home sites for the rest of us. So
Yeah.
interesting. That's cool. So 2017, was your neighbor responsible for this harvest? Because you mentioned that 18 with the whites was kind of your first vintage that you put under bottle. So is this wine that they had, were storing in barrel or tank, or how?
He said
talk
his
through that.
first bottle was 18, but that doesn't mean the reds weren't in barrel.
Well, that was my question: is how hands-on were you of the harvesting of this?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. The only reason that my 17s weren't is because I didn't have. He had a place in somebody else's winery already, so I could make the wine, the 17s in that winery, and I was also making 17s at my house at that time still. And so those didn't go into bottles. They weren't into a bonded winery, and these were. So it was just a technicality. And mine, I guess the way I put it is my 17s weren't ready. My reds from my vineyard were still under that. We're transitioning and we're getting those vines into good shape and making them ready for high quality wines.
Yeah, got it.
They just weren't there yet. My 17s just weren't there. They weren't that good yet.
So since you were really hands-on with this, did you have a lot of say over the oak program? Were you using neutral barrels for this, new barrels?
No, I made it. I mean, I did it 100%.
Right.
Yeah. This is all neutral barrels. This was, and that was, it was what we were doing at the time. Part of it was the people that I was working with or within their winery, they were kind of fans of all neutral oak. I have since been, I'm more of a fan of new oak.
Mm-hmm.
And so my later wines have evolved into ones where I have more and more oak influence with them, and the reds especially, because to me it's magical. But these wines on their own, I think mostly because of the vintage of 2017, were much more acid driven than most of the red wines are around here.
Mhm.
And so, they really show well in the neutral oak. Thank you, Allison.
Yeah, Allison, any final words on the Merlot before you leave?
No, I'm saving the Merlot to drink when I can enjoy it more. So I brought it with me, but I'm going to drink it later. But no, I really enjoyed the whites and listening, and I'm excited to taste the reds, and I will share my thoughts later. And I will listen to the rest of this to get all your thoughts, but I'm sorry I have to go. I've got a client downstairs, so off to take care of him.
Have fun.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Bye.
the bar.
Thank you.
Where are you going for dinner?
I don't know, wherever we can get in.
Yeah, that's true. Enjoy habanero or su casa. Bye. No, it's a really fun Merlot. And again, it's one of those varietals that, I don't know what we were making kind of prior to 27, just in your home winemaking, but was Merlot a grape that you had experience with, or was this one where you're just really kind of feeling yourself out with the varietal? Because you mentioned it's got that great acidity, which is, you know, not super common for a red wine.
Well, and from Merlot, I mean, it definitely has been different each year that I've made it since. And this one, I think it's a great Merlot, and I think it's a great red wine. And I think that each one of the years since then has probably been a little bit more in line with what people think of Merlot. I mean, you get what you get out of the vineyard.
Yeah.
And you know, this year had the 2017 was definitely a vintage that had a peculiar and interesting characteristics.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we had been
Here,
like 15 was the big drought year, kind of leading into 16, but then we got a fair amount of rain in 16 and really early 17, kind of leading into that. So I do remember it was definitely a wetter year, kind of a better year in that way, or at least a bigger year for Paso back in those days.
right?
Now is Merlot still a grape that you want to work with, would like to work with, you know, now that the vineyard is gone? Is it something that you're looking for, finding other Merlot vineyards out there, or are you really just going to focus on your own estate stuff?
It's probably not something that I'm going to keep doing, but I was very eager to be able to get the last year of it. So I did make it in 2021 here, which is great because I was very happy to do that.
Yeah.
But I think that it's probably going to be that's probably going to be the end of that legacy. But you know, I'm eager and interested in each one of the years that I have those grapes available. In 2018 we had a very small amount. We ended up doing a blend of Cabernet and Merlot, and it's very nice. Very big, rich wine, very different than what 2017 gave us. And in 2019, we have just recently bottled that. Well, we bottled that last summer, last August, and it's still just coming into its own right now. So, but 2019 is a very unique and peculiar year as well for the flavors and aromas that I've gotten out of the reds. Very distinct like 2017, but very different.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, I know early 18 we got a lot of rain, but 19 was fairly dry, if memory serves. So yeah, but probably
this year is presenting us with something really unique. I don't even have bud break yet, and it's, you know, March 10th. This is, I mean, you know, usually in my place it happens very early, and so I'm always expecting it before March 1st.
Okay.
It's weird, but that's what happens at my place. This year, I'm 10 days in and I don't even see anything happening yet. So
now that's interesting, because I would think that where you're located, you know, would be on the cooler side of things. So it would be a later bud break than that early as March 1st.
You would think so, but it's also on top of a hill, and when we get a few warm days, it's just very conducive to that bud break. So we get it pretty early.
Yeah.
Well, I harvest early too. I mean, we harvest early compared to the area.
Nice. When are you typically harvesting? Like end of August, early September, or like?
We have, but generally it's you know, first to the, you know, depending on the grape. I mean, we have, you know, the late grapes are late, but the early stuff does tend to happen around the first week of September, first to second week.
Yeah, no, this Merlot is just really well balanced, and it's got that higher level of acidity. And I mean, I think this is a wine that, as it gets older, like in the next 4 or 5 plus years, you're going to see that acidity drop out just a little bit, but it's really going to help preserve it. And I could see this particular wine having, you know, quite a long shelf life, and still maintaining that bright fruit because of the preservation of that acidity.
Yes. However, whoever owns it, because
Right.
they're
You have so little of it that it's going to be for collectors only.
for whoever doesn't want to open their bottle, because that is, I think that Tuesday will be the end of ours, so we won't have after Tuesday.
At that point, it is officially gone. Interesting.
Yeah.
And it's 15. What's interesting is 15.5% alcohol, which
It doesn't taste it, does it?
no. And especially, I mean, just even thinking about where your property is located, you know, I know there are, you know, places like Dubost and Carmen de McKnight where it can get a little bit hotter, but I tend to think you're in that cooler spell. But I guess if you're on top of the hill, you're getting a little bit more heat there to get it up to as high as 15.5. But for Merlot, that seems really high.
It does, and well, we've seen those numbers. We've seen those numbers pretty consistently from this vineyard. But interestingly, both of this vineyard and then right across the street from it is Whalebone winery, their vineyard, and theirs is even higher acid and even a later harvest. And it looks the same between those two vineyards. So it's pretty interesting how they have even a further delay in their Cabernet. Theirs is 100% Cabernet. Yeah, I think for me, what's interesting about this wine is that it doesn't taste like a 15.5 alcohol wine. It tastes like almost an under 14.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that level of acidity. I would have thought it was closer to like 12.5, 13.5. And then
that's what,
yeah, to see that 15.5. And I know, you know, winemakers get a little wiggle room with the alcohol. You know, it's supposed to be 1%, but I know some people who've gone as high as 2% swings just so they're not looking.
Yeah. You know, my wines have been pretty much in line. And so, I mean, as a matter of fact, all I do is I just delete the last decimal place on it. And I just use whatever it is, because I've never had one that that gave me any sort of sense of, oh no, you know,
right.
They've all been pretty much in line with what I want them to be. And so I've never really worried about it. I mean, in fact, I have one that we're, I think it was the one that we bottled last bottling was 15.9. And so I was like, oh no, it's the upcoming one.
Okay.
And I was like, whoa, that's high, but it is what it is. And I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
And one of the things you really find is that when you look at the West Side, Paso wineries, like look at Lenny Coloto or Saxum or any of those guys, you'll see them all pushing 16%. Saxum's first release of a white wine was over 15%.
Yeah, that's a great point, because, you know, I think there's a lot of people who still believe that, you know, you only see 15 plus east of the 101 in the warmer side of Paso, but you're right, you can get 14 and a half, 15, even 16 wines on the west side. And
they can be gorgeous wines.
Yeah.
It's not dependent on some sort of speed limit on the alcohol on it. Because every one of these people that are making these wines are studying that vineyard and studying the ripeness and working toward acid and pH and phenolics, and they are, you know, they know what they're doing, and it's okay. What they find is that the higher, the more ripe wines, if you don't pass a certain threshold, they want to go right to it. You know, they want to go to the threshold that is correct for that wine, for that vineyard.
Yeah, it's just making sure you've got that balance where if your alcohol is going to be a little higher, you've got enough tannin or acid to balance it out so that it doesn't, you're not afraid to hold a lighter near your face after you've drunk the wine.
Right.
You end up like the mom in Better Off Dead. But
Hey, and participants, please ask questions.
we have a very introspective group here, and those that are eating themselves. Speaking of eating, I will tell you that I am going to put this wine in the refrigerator overnight, and then tomorrow I will take it out. I have a very nice New York strip that I am going to cook up for myself tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to this Merlot paired with it because of that acidity and New York strip being a little more grippier. Matt having sausage ragu over polenta, which sounds delicious. And yeah, I could see the saltiness of the pork sausage in there, that Italian style sausage really, working well with this wine, plus that kind of tomatoey notes and the richness of the polenta would be fantastic. John, any other, I think mushrooms would be great with this, because mushrooms are so earthy and rich, even like a mushroom soup, because this has such acidity to it. I could see like cream and mushroom soup being terrific with this wine.
Yeah. Chanterelles, something wild mushrooms.
Daniela, any food thoughts? She seems to be the cook of the household.
I'm sure she has lots of them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, while we're waiting for that, let's move on to our last wine, which is your 2017 Perspective. And clearly you like to give fun names for your blends, the Costera with the white. So where did the Perspective name come from, this Cab Merlot blend?
This one was, so this was Daniela. Daniela was, she decided that we bottled both the 17 Perspective and our 18 Retrospect, both Cab Merlot blends, I believe at the same time. Or we labeled the Perspective and we bottled the Retrospective at the same time. And so it was her play on our forward thinking and reverse thinking on it, that we had the 17 gave us Perspective, and the 18 we were able to have a retrospective view of the winemaking at that point, because they were first vintage and second vintage of this blend of the grapes from that vineyard, the Cabernet Merlot grapes from that vineyard.
Nice. And this is 50-50 blend. Again, was that something that you had kind of always envisioned, or was that just when you got the two lots together, that's kind of the way that it came about?
Yeah, this was just, we're talking barrel sizes, so these were a barrel of this and a barrel of that, and that's
just throw them together and see what happens.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, we certainly, every time we're doing something like this, we're very meticulous about it. We're doing blending, we're doing, you start out blending by doing, one of each, and blending is an amazing and intricate process where you start out one of each, and then you do 1/3, 2/3, and then you start going from there. And so, you start breaking it down into all these elements, and you try to keep your wits about you as you go through it to while you're drinking alcohol, and try to somehow come up with a reasonable answer that says, hey, this was the best thing. But I think that, we did our due diligence, and we found that we really liked what came about with the lots that we had, and so we went with it. You're definitely going to default with that unless you find a problem with it. If you find something you don't like about it, you're definitely not going to do it. You're going to reserve one of those and do a small bottling of that, and do a 75-25% if that's what it takes.
Yeah, it's just the ingenuity of, kind of what you have, and as a small producer, a micro producer, really just kind of, making, what is it, silk purse out of the sow's ear. Not that these are sow's ears grapes by any stretch of the
I
imagination.
know what you mean, and it does. As we've grown and we've incorporated more things into our winery, we have a little bit more to work with on some of the later vintages. We've made decisions that are far more complex than that, but they don't necessarily make it. You don't necessarily need that to make that happen. So when we have a small lot of some things, we will experiment with it, and we'll definitely look for something unique that makes the best of each one of those wines. But we ultimately, with all winemaking, you're looking at each individual barrel and each individual lot of wine, and those are your starting points always.
Yeah, kind of the guideposts.
Awesome. You might just be bottling that because you don't want to touch it with anything else.
Yeah. So we know this, it's the same Merlot from your neighbors. Is the cab from the same place as well?
That's an interesting story as well. The Cabernet, this perspective, was actually from Whalebone's vineyard.
Okay.
They had a fairly large crop in 2017, and we took I think it was a ton of their grapes instead of the other neighbor. And so it actually gave us a higher acidity than we would have gotten from the other one. And part of that was the farming practices were different, really. I mean, that was kind of the main difference that I would say between the two. And since my neighbor that has Whalebone offered me that, I said, hey, yeah, let's try it. I want to try your grapes as well. So give me an opportunity to try something different.
Yeah, and it gave you a substantially lower alcohol than just the straight Merlot. This being 14 even.
And that's testament to their, to their vineyard and to their wines. I think theirs are generally, they're higher acid and lower alcohol. Not so much that they're harvesting earlier, but they don't get right. And I don't know, they may have a different clone across the street from one another, but they're definitely different wines. And they're definitely a week or 2 weeks off between every year that I see them harvesting. They've always been later than the ones right across the street.
That's interesting. Do you think it could be the clone? Is it also maybe just their particular terroir might be cooler than the other?
It's so close. I mean, if you look at a Google map of this, it's like ridiculous. It's across the fence. It's nothing.
Interesting. That's one of those just weird little quirks of nature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one's south facing and one's kind of the one on the Jones Ridge was east-west rows in kind of a saddle.
Okay. Yeah.
And the Whalebone, which you would think would ripen faster because it's on a south-facing hillside on the other side of the street. You'd think that would be a little bit more intense sunshine, but they still end up almost 2 weeks later in harvest.
Yeah, or with that saddle, you've got like your hot pockets and your colder pockets with that natural kind of U shape.
Kind of, yeah.
I mean, it depends on how, I guess, deep the saddle is.
Between two forests, I guess, is the way. And to me, that would indicate something that would ripen a little bit later, just from seeing the topography. But it's not true, not in that case.
It's the weird changes of nature that we just can't understand.
There's too subtle.
Yeah. So you mentioned that this wine you bottled the same time as the 18 retrospective.
I corrected myself.
Okay.
We labeled this wine, so we had bottled it earlier, but we had bottled it as Shiners, so no labels on it. And then once we finished our labeling, we brought them in when we were bottling the other stuff and did the labeling at that time.
Got it. But so it got a little bit of extra bottle age rather than just barrel age than the 18.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it was the next bottling round. So I mean, equal time in barrel. So the 17s and 18s each had equal time in barrel, but we just brought it around the following year and labeled them because we didn't have a way to sell them at that time anyway. We had made them in a bonded winery, but we didn't have a tasting room.
Got it. Is the Perspective, is that a wine that's kind of continued through your portfolio or will continue, or is it the same thing as the Merlot? It's kind of like it's hit its end point, unfortunately.
It might. I'm not sure about that. I have to sort of see where I'm headed in the next few years. I'm more inclined to stick with Spanish and Rhone, the Mediterranean grapes, the more southern grapes, and steer away from the Bordeaux. Just my personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
So my guess is that I will probably end the Cab and Merlot route within my winery. Although that's one of those things that I like when I like the cabs that we make here. I've liked everything that we've done. Mm-hmm. So I would miss it a little bit, but I'm trying to remain as a very, very small winery. So I have to pick the grapes very carefully. Yeah. Limited. It has to be very limited to do this.
Yeah. What is your total case production?
Well, our goal has been 500 cases per year. And that's very, very, very small.
Yes,
but
it is.
We're within a group that there's lots of people in that group.
Yeah. No, because I think micro winery is technically 1,000 cases. So 500 cases or less is a nano winery. But you're right.
But there are a lot of us that are in the nano winery category.
I'll be pouring one of those tomorrow. So.
and I really want to stay within that range. Yeah. So that means the disadvantage to that is that it's hard to do 8 different grapes when you're doing that. You can't do 800 grapes or 8 different grapes and stay within 500 cases. It's just you're dealing with 5-gallon buckets of wine at that level.
Exactly.
If you get too many. So I have to pick very carefully every year. And I think that for me, what that means is I'll stick with my 4 that I have on my vineyard on the estate, and then it'll be 1 or 2 outside grapes that I'll be working with each year. And I will try to vary that every year.
Nice. Do you have some ideas of what those grapes that you want to work with, those outside grapes are?
Particular interest, and now I have 2 years under my belt, but nothing released yet, of Grenache. And Grenache is really sort of a big favorite for me. So that's definitely a focus right now. It's probably that main focus right now.
Very nice. Is it Adelaida Grenache? Are you sourcing from vineyards close to yours?
It's close. It's not Adelaida. This would be Templeton.
Okay.
Then Gap.
Yeah.
That's where I've been sourcing it for 2 years now, for 2021. Nice. And so we're bottling half of our 20 in a couple weeks, and we're going to hold the other half of it for another year in barrel, and do a later bottling, a little bit more aged one. So we want to get a Grenache out. I'm very excited about it, but we only want to do half of it so that we can see what happens in the barrel and get some more experience with the barrel aging. Yeah,
absolutely. Are you going to keep the Grenache single varietal, or are you thinking about maybe blending it with the Syrah or the Tempranillo?
It'll be likely have a little bit of one or both of them in it, but it'll probably, the first one that we're bottling is going to be a straight Grenache. It's going to be 100%.
Sure.
But I will most likely be doing something with maybe what do we call it? A GST,
That's fun.
Raw Tempranillo.
Yeah.
That's probably what I'm going to do with the rest of the 20. We'll see.
Interesting. Very like Priorat-esque, I can kind of say, which would be interesting.
Is that a thing?
I don't know if, I mean, Priorat, I know they can grow Garnacha, Carniena, Syrah. I don't know if they actually do Tempranillo in Priorat, but they might.
But it's close, so it's got to be nearby.
Yeah, you could certainly use the name as a marketing tool, like come up with like Priorata or like Prior or something like that.
Yeah. All right, Danielle is on it.
All right, perfect. Yes, just give me credit somehow. Oh, and you guys are doing a pet nat, a rosé of Grenache pet nat, which is interesting.
Yeah. So we have that in bottle. That was a portion of the juice from the Grenache in our 21, and we ran that off and made it into a rosé, and we put it into the bottle for a pet nat style sparkling.
Interesting. Yes. How have you sampled that yet, or is it still fermenting?
You know, it's interesting that we were just at the Garagiste festival down in Solvang, and I think there were 3 of them that were all 21 releases that people were already pouring. And I haven't even had I haven't opened one to even see if it's fully sparkling yet or not. So we'll see. I usually just wait for a while because, you know, for me, they've been in fairly cold weather, cold storage for a while, and I'm confident that they're done fermenting right now, but I just haven't had the time to pull one aside and open it and see what it's like. We're already committed to it, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else you can do at this point other than drop it down the drain. So it's like, we're going to sell it.
So I can wait for a while. I would put the labels on it. And we were going to be doing a bottling and labeling on March 1st, and now it's been pushed back to April 1st. So
I think you could play the like, we age our pet nat for 5 years game and just do a longer age on it and see how it goes and market that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I might already know how it'll go. So
once those crown caps start bursting off of the top.
No, we've got it down to where we don't really have that problem. But to me, that actually the carbon dioxide in it is one of the things that actually allows those pet nats or champagnes to age a really long time. With carbon dioxide in it, it's like a preservative.
Yep.
So it's actually really cool. Which means that, our 2018 Viognier pet nat is as good as day one, and it's been 4 years now.
Wow.
So, I mean,
yeah. I guess the only thing you would see would be maybe a slight dilution of the bubbles, like just your pressure dropping off. But, even that's probably.
Yeah, we haven't seen that at all. They've been very good, and the wine tastes amazingly fresh, because we also have a still wine of the exact same vintage, and there's definitely a difference between that.
Yeah. Matt, to answer your question, it's Pétillant Naturel is what it is. It's basically a way of making sparkling wine without having to go through all of the labor of the method traditionnel, where you're riddling the bottles and then freezing the neck and popping out the yeast cells. It's basically, you add the yeast cells into your still wine with a little bit of a wine sugar mix, allow a secondary fermentation. Go ahead, John.
We don't even do that. In fact, what we do is we cool the wine down when it's almost done fermenting. So we don't have to add any sugar or anything to it. The only thing we add is yeast and some nutrient.
Okay.
Then we put it into the bottles and cap it, and we let it finish the natural fermentation that was already happening. We warm it back up and let it happen in the bottle. It's kind of similar to a bottle conditioned beer, in that we're looking for about 20 pounds of pressure as opposed to 60 to 70 in a champagne.
Right.
So It's an interesting process that also has a bit of an uncertainty to it. It's an uncertainty in terms of how much cloudiness might be there because of the yeast cells that are still in the bottle.
Yep.
And then it's an uncertainty on how much pressure will be in the bottle because you don't know whether the yeast will finish out perfectly. And it may have a little residual sugar in it as well. So it's kind of an interesting mostly experimental process, but
Yes.
it's interesting that winemakers are finding processes to alter the basic method of doing it in order to maximize those effects. Like some of them will stop that fermentation much earlier and put it in the bottle, and then they disgorge it. They hold it upside down, disgorge it, turn it right side up, and put a cap on it again.
Yeah.
To clarify. What I do is I clarify the wine before I put it back into the bottle, and that gives me a pretty much clear wine, although I still have active yeast going on it.
Yeah, you'll have a little bit of lees at the bottom of it, but not that cloudiness that you get.
Very little, because most of the fermentation is already done. When most of the fermentation is done, you've got dead yeast cells already, you've got that lees already in the bottom of the barrel or the tank. And so if you rack that off, if you clarify that, you still have active yeast in the bottle or in the tank, but you don't have, but you can get rid of all of that stuff at the bottom and you get a pretty clear version of it.
Yeah. Those are not the pet nats that I've had. The ones that I've had, you cannot see through the wine because of the cloudiness,
Yeah.
and you never quite know what you're going to get when you pop that cap. It's a little bit like roulette, but it's become a very popular way of making sparkling wine that, as John was saying, can be released in a very short time, as opposed to where you need, anywhere from 6 to 18 months to do the méthode traditionnelle style of, secondary tirage fermentation and a disgorgement and whatnot.
Well, and also it's a little bit more of a fun thing. It's definitely been made popular by very small winemakers as something we can do in-house, and we really don't worry about it being perfect. We want it to be a little bit, you hear words like funkiness and things like that in pet nats because they can be, and it's okay,
It's a hipster wine, basically. It's a wine for the hipsters. silly Gen Z hipsters. No, I'm kidding.
We got one more wine, perspective.
Yes, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about this. What and we're over the 8 o'clock hour, but we'll kind of wrap this up. What I'm enjoying about this, especially after having tasted the Merlot, is I can pick out the specific parts of the Merlot. The acidity provides a lot of structure to it, and then the cabbiness to me provides that cherry, almost kind of like a little bit of a Tootsie Roll note to it. So you get you can almost sort of dissect the two parts of it separately, which I think is interesting, but it's still a very well balanced wine.
Food comments, Matt?
He's talking with somebody else off screen. So I think the sausage ragu was the last course. So
well, that's fine. That's pretty good. Yeah, I think that I would say that it's an interesting wine. The Cabernet is a little bit, it's definitely the lightest red wine that I've made.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with those sort of bright fruit flavors, red fruit flavors, it's a nice supple wine.
Yeah. Without
being, it's definitely not the big meaty wine that you
meatloaf with faux mashed with cauliflower mashed potatoes. Nice. I could see that. Yeah, nice gravy over top of that as well would be delicious. Yeah, this is one to me that I like. To me, I lean almost more into, because it's got a little bit more of that fruitiness from the cab that I think the Merlot lacked. where I want something more savory. This one, I want something a little more sweet. So I could see the meatloaf with like the, you know, sort of sweet chili sauce on top of it.
Right.
I could see
A ketchup edge to it, right?
Yeah. like barbecue ribs with like a molasses based sauce would be really nice with this. For my vegan friends down there, some smoky tempeh would be really, really nice with this. Yeah, marinara. This would be a really nice wine to pair with a heartier marinara. Almost just, you don't even need a full marinara, just like diced tomatoes that you've kind of reduced in a pan a little bit, and then throw that on with some sausage, or even with like a nice kind of braised cut of beef would be really nice with this. Yeah, very nice. Well, this was awesome, and yeah, thank you so much. So, you know, where is the future of MEA Wines going? We talked, you know, a little bit about sort of ending the Bordeaux side, focusing more on the Rhones, the Spanish, but, you know, you kind of want to limit to 500. Where would you like to see your winery going in the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, well, I think it's just that. I mean, it's hard to there's not a lot of difference between what we're doing now and what I see. Like I see us just basically concentrating on things that are unique in the area. And what really is interesting about Paso Robles, the viticultural areas, is that we have a lot of variety.
Yes.
So, you know, the things that I'm interested in are picking up a little bit of that, the unique varieties that we keep importing to the area and working with them. You know, we've got all of the Rhones that Tablas has brought in, and there's been many people along Vineyard Drive that have picked some of those up and have been doing amazing work with them. So I think that it's going to be continuing those differences or unique opportunities that we have here in Paso Robles to experiment with wines that way. And as far as blends, I think that for me, I'm more interested in the single variety wines. I do like to blend when I put small amounts of things into them to create balance in the wines, but I'm really, for the most part, other than, I mean, I think that the Costera was a little bit unique for me, but it came out really nicely. And so I think that there's an opportunity for unique blending. I don't think I'm really interested in, like I've got some friends that are, you know, there's the Viognier and Marsanne and Roussanne thing, and just do blends with those. And to me, those are like, that's what the Europeans have. It's not necessarily something that I need to explore so much, but I am interested in putting things together and saying, hey, this works well. You know, like using Tempranillo as a blending grape in some of my other stuff. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, it'll just, I guess, kind of depend on the weather conditions, what sort of tonnage you get, and, you know, whether you've got enough to do a single bottling of it, or if you've got some extra to be able to play around with it and, you know, blend.
You know, to me, it's like trying to stick to that nano spot that you're working in and just make that work. You've got to be very careful with it. I find that it's very difficult to rein all those things in and then still try to make the unique wines. The big wineries will have so many different things available in their winery to be able to do that. And I would like to do that, but I don't really want the wineries, the walls to burst open. And I've got too much wine, and now I'm worrying about how much wine that I have stacked up in here.
Yeah, when you've got, you know, 2,000 cases that you need to sell in the next 6 months, that's
Yeah, keep it interesting, but keep it small at the same time.
Yeah, the difference between the 64 Crayola box with the built-in sharpener to it and just the like little 6 box, you know, you can make masterpieces with both. It's
Yes, that's my goal, is to make masterpieces from each one of those. Well, thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Glad
And
you got wines.
yeah, and I was going to say the most important question of the night is if, you know, people want to come up and visit and taste some of your other wines, your Tempranillo, your Syrah, the single varietal Vermentino and Albarinos that you're doing, how can they do that? What's the best way to get in touch with you, to pick up more wines, all that good stuff?
All right, so that brings me to 2 different things. One is, don't be shy to ask me for if you're interested in something. We've got quite a few wines here besides the 4 that you tasted tonight. So those things are really, you know, I'm willing to open up things for you guys to taste anytime. MEAWine.com, as Danielle pointed out, is the main focus. We have our website. We are generally open Thursday through Sundays in the afternoons, from 1 o'clock to, it's like 5, 6, or 4, depending on what day it is on the weekends. And we would really appreciate it if people get in touch with us through our website. We've got a message thing on the website, and you can email as well. But if you go to MEAWine.com, all the information is there. We don't really have a order online thing going, but you can easily order from us just by telling us on the message or by email what you would like, and we can put together an order for you and work with you that way. We can ship, we can, you can pick up at our winery. We do the tastings here at the winery, so we're pretty much available anytime and can accommodate you. Even if it's an off day, I can usually meet somebody here. So
yes, we're going to see half of Stacy's face. There she is. There's all of Stacy. Yeah, no, we're hearing raves about the Merlot. People really love the Merlot and the Costera. And of course, you can always contact them through MEAWine.com, or if you like the wines, let me know, and I'm happy to put in orders with them and then can drive them down to you next time in April when I'm down there if you want to pick up some additional bottles. So do not hesitate to do that. At this point, John, thank you for being here. I'm going to stop the recording, and if people want to unmute themselves and ask any questions, we can go ahead and do that for a few minutes.